wollen jetzt ein bisschen über unsere nationalen Grenzen hinausschauen in ein Land, in dem die erneuerbaren Energien ebenfalls einen schon sehr beachtlichen Anteil an der Energiegewinnung haben, nämlich nach Spanien. Und wir wollen schauen, wie in Spanien die Netzintegration bewerkstelligt und vorangetrieben wird. Und das alles soll uns ein Mann sagen, der 2003 an der TU Darmstadt einen Master als Elektroingenieur erlangt hat. Zuvor hat er in seiner Heimat in Madrid einen Master in Industrial Engineering abgelegt. Von 2004 an war er leitender Ingenieur im Operationszentrum von Eléctrica, das ist der spanische Hochspannungsnetzbetreiber. Und seit 2007 ist er der Koordinator für die Steuerung des Netzes und für die Integration der erneuerbaren Energien in das Netz. Hier kommt für Sie Miguel de la Torre Rodríguez.
So, vielen Dank. So, wie gesagt, mein Name ist Miguel de la Torre und ich arbeite bei der spanischen System- und Netzbetreiber Eléctrica de España. Und erstmals wollte ich bei Ihnen mich entschuldigen, dass ich den Vortrag auf Englisch vortrage, da fühle ich mich nicht so sicher auf Deutsch alles das zu erzählen. So from now on I will continue in English. Well, the question here was if Spain was a pioneer for integrating renewable energy into the grid. And well, I think we are all among pioneers in integrating the different types of renewable energies into the grid. And my wish would be right now, well, to try to well, explain or show the Spanish example of how we have been integrating this type of energies into our grid with the challenges and what were our main solutions by Red Eléctrica de España. So first of all, I would like to just say a few words about the Spanish electric system, so more or less compare that to the German one. Also a comparison of the generation mix in both countries. I would also like to talk about the evolution of the installed capacity and how were the different technologies installed. I would like to go also into the challenges of renewable integration in Spain and talk mainly about one of our main solutions where I do my day-to-day work, the Control Center for Renewable Energies, and then some wrap-up and conclusions. So basically, in Spain we have only one TSO, Red Eléctrica de España. It's a little bit different than in Germany, where there is 4. And Red Eléctrica also owns 99.5% of the transmission grid. We have the main system is the peninsular system, which is connected to the continental Europe system. However, we also have operate 10 island systems in the Balearic Islands, the Canary Islands, and also in 2 cities in north of Africa, which are Spanish, Ceuta and Melilla. Just to get a hint about how big the Spanish peninsular system is, the record peak demand was reached in 2007 at 45,550 megawatts. Just as a rough estimate, just imagine that is more or less half of the German system. So also in terms of produced energy is more or less half at 250 terawatt hours. Well, you know, for Western European standards, Spain is a quite a large country and not very densely populated. So that means lots of kilometers of lines. And here you see that we have, so Red Eléctrica owns close to 40,000 kilometers of 400 and 220 kV lines with more than 600 substations. Probably the hottest topic in Spain right now. And as I mentioned before, it's important that the power system studies are done to see what are the limitations of the different technologies and what are the advantages of these technologies, and that these technologies are able also to support the system. I think in Spain between 2008 and 2009, we saw a good example of industry response to this, because the wind parks needed an adaptation to be able to withstand voltage dips, and you probably are aware of or are aware that this was a problem back in the days. Nowadays, it's a solved problem, hopefully. And of course, a very important issue is whether the network developments are there in order to accommodate further renewable energies. And one solution that was specifically important for us was the construction of the control center for renewable energies, which basically, well, here in the picture, you can see in the picture on the left, you can see our control room. From here is from where we operate basically the system and the network, or most of the network. And on the left of our control room, we have specific control center just for supervising and controlling renewable energy sources. There is actually a lot of information about this control center in our website in case you have further interest. Basically, the control center, which is called the CECRE, receives from 30 other we call renewable generation control centers real-time information about what's happening in the plants. So basically, we know exactly the production of the plants. We know we know the voltage at the connection point. We know the most important information about each plant that has an installed capacity larger than 1 megawatt. With that information, we use that information in order to do our contingency analysis. So we do our N-1 analysis with this information. So we treat basically renewable energy sources just like any other conventional mean. And we check in real time whether this scenario is admissible, whether the system is secure at that time. And in most of the cases, we find that the system is actually pretty much secure. Unfortunately, there are very specific times at which we find that for mainly two reasons, the system has some kind of risk at that point. And one of the main reasons is because of congestion in some area, which can happen in the transmission grid or in the distribution grid, or because the markets and the balancing markets have not been able to balance the system, and there is excess generation. And as a last resort solution, we can send set points to the plants that have an installed capacity larger than 10 megawatts. And basically this means curtailing them for a certain amount of time in order to maintain the security of the system. And this is, of course, done only as a last resort measure. The CECRE allows this type of curtailment decisions to be made actually in real time, so with the estimates or with the perfect view of what you have in the system. And not having to make those decisions beforehand, which normally means that we are at the end maximizing the production of the renewable energy sources. And the facilities with an installed capacity larger than 10 megawatts, they have to comply with this set point within 15 minutes. Right now, I would like to go into a couple of examples where you see, in order to try to explain what is the use of such a control center. So here what you see, the curve, is basically a daily demand curve for the Spanish peninsular system. This is a winter curve, and you can see that the difference between the peak demand and the off-peak demand is actually quite large. So there is already a lot of variability in the demand of the Spanish peninsular system. And you can, in this day, I think this is from the 1st of March 2013, actually in this day, during off-peak hours, wind was actually quite high. And during the peak hours of the consumption, so during the evening, actually the wind was relatively low, or lower than during the off-peak hours. And in order to balance the system, you can see on the graph on the bottom right corner that this is the production of the gas production units, mostly are combined cycle units. And at this day, during the night, only 5 combined cycle units were connected to the grid. But in order to supply the peak demand, 25 additional combined cycle units had to switch onto the network. And again, the next night, we see a similar situation, and many combined cycle units had to switch off at the same day. Actually, these combined cycle units at the beginning were constructed in order for as a base load. Sorry. And actually, in many of the days, they are actually functioning as a peak plant with daily cycling. Sorry. If we bring this to an extreme, I have a very extreme example of what happened during the Holy Friday in 2013. Here on the graph, you see the demand, and you see the different technologies that were supplying that demand. So on the bottom, for example, you see hydro in blue. Actually, this was, you see the same, so the production during the day of that hydro on the graphs on the right. On the top one, actually, in the spring of 2013, we had a very high, it was very wet and very rainy, and we had high runoffs during the hydro season. And the problem is that the Spanish legislation only allows the hydro producers to spill water over the dam only in emergency situations. So in this case, many hydro producers were not able to ramp down due to other legislation that at the end also influenced the electric system. The demand was actually very low at around 17,000 megawatts. Well, there is about 7,000 megawatts of continuous nuclear power. And you see, we had a situation here during the first hours of this day that actually there was no way. There was so much excess generation that there wasn't. The only way to balance the system was to ramp down the renewable energies almost to zero. And you can see the wind graph on the middle of the slide. Sorry. Where you can see that for several hours, actually, the wind was ramped down to zero. And this could be actually only be done thanks to the CECRE. Actually, the situation was so bad that actually also the nuclear generation had to be ramped down, which hadn't been done for about 25 years. So actually, this is a very extreme situation of what happens when we have excess generation. Well, there are other situations where we successfully can integrate that much wind generation without having to curtail any. And we have reached, actually, this was in, thank you very much. This was, actually, this is the same graph for the Christmas Day 2013. And there was actually quite a high amount of wind generation being generated during the off-peak hours. But actually, the hydro dams in this case were not so full. And there were actually some, you can see actually the hydro graphs on the, again, on the right bottom corner of the slide, where you see that actually during those off-peak hours, the hydro generation was negative. This was because, so this is because we graph also the pumping units in that graph, and therefore, so this the sum of the hydro units was actually negative. On the same graph, a little bit to the top, you can see those are the commercial or the real exchanges with our neighbors. So we were actually exporting at that time 2,600 megawatts. And with this situation, actually 68.5% of the demand was actually being supplied by wind energy, which for a country so weakly interconnected, we think it was actually a very high success. You can see actually, so there is some stripes that you can see in yellow and red color. Those are the gas-fired generation and the coal-fired generation that were kept strictly to a minimum to try to to avoid some overloads in certain regions of the network. Actually, this was not only the record that was reached in 2013 by wind. Actually, in Spain, in the Spanish continental system, so in the Spanish peninsular system, wind was in 2013 already the main contributor to the Spanish electricity mix with 54.7 terawatt hours. This was in 2013, wind produced a little bit more energy than nuclear. In 2014 was the other way around, but they were both very close on both years. Actually, 54.7 terawatt hours in 2013 was a higher production than the wind production here in Germany. So we could say that in 2013, even with less installed capacity, Spain was the first producer in terms of energy. This was, of course, not the case in 2014, where I assume that in Germany there was a newly installed capacity and then better wind year, and so Germany surpassed again this. So the German wind production surpassed again the Spanish wind production. But as you can see, so for us, and jumping more or less into the conclusions, so we have to treat RES generation as a main contributor already to the Spanish generation mix. It is our day-to-day life. We know integrating variable generation is a challenging task, but we are right now at a point where we know it can be done in a secure manner, and this is not a debate anymore, as has been in the last, maybe if we had this conversation maybe 8 or 10 years ago, there were still many people thinking that that we could not technically reach the amount of renewable generation that we have actually reached in our system, and I'm pretty sure also in the German one. Well, for us, the Control Center for Renewable Energies has been a significant enabler for these high penetration rates, basically making this technology compatible in real time with security of supply in a weakly interconnected system. And, well, nonetheless, and unfortunately, there are still some situations where RES curtailment is unavoidable, in order to mainly to keep the system balanced. And well, thanks to this control center, this real-time management, this curtailment can be kept to a minimum. And well, basically, I would like to thank you a lot for being present and during the last talk of the very interesting and challenging day. And well, here you also have my email address in case you want to ask some questions. But I will be open right now for questions if you wish. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you very much for this interesting insight in the Spanish system. If you put it in a comparison, how stable is the Spanish system in comparison to the other European countries? What is the baseline of this investment you made?
So you mean how?
If you look at different countries within Europe, how stable is the Spanish system?
So I would say that so the stability of the Spanish system, from the technical point of view, is more or less the same as for all European countries. But for us, that means that we need to put a lot of commercial capacity between Spain and France. We need to save a lot of that commercial capacity in order to be able to maintain this same level of stability. So that means at the end that right now we need to do the balancing for ourselves. And that is, of course, a very high, that increases the challenge.
That is more challenging
than in many other countries, like, for example, in Germany, or in France, or in Italy, where the interconnection, the commercial exchange capacity is much higher, and therefore, if you have low renewable production, you will have probably more imports, and if you have a higher renewable production, you will have probably more exports.
Thank you. Meine Damen und Herren, gibt es Fragen und Anmerkungen? Sonst noch bitteschön. Zweimal bitte in der 4. Reihe.
Thank you. You must not curtail your production because you have no bottlenecks in your grid. Did I understand it right? And what's about demand-side management?
So we have, so most of the curtailment is because of off-peak balancing. There is some curtailment also due to the grid. I would say around 99% of the curtailment is because of off-peak balancing, and 1% of the curtailment is due to the grid. So basically, the grid is actually quite meshed. However, if more investments in generation are going to be done in the future, of course, we need to study if this same degree of curtailment will be the same if the grid is kept the same, or what will be the investments that need to be done the same way as in Germany if more and more renewable energy comes into the grid. Also, one of the solutions for balancing is demand-side balancing and demand-side management, and so the ministry is also working in new ways right now, whether demand, so now in trying to allow demand also to participate in balancing services, and therefore so also the demand side could be also an important enabler in integrating renewable energies, which basically is balancing the system.
I have also a question. I find this really impressive that in Spain, we are from Iberdrola. I think together we achieved this possibility to integrate double the wind energy as is the case in Germany. Mm-hmm. And I think here you were just saying that renewables shall start to participate in balancing in the market. So my question is, you as a grid operator, are you favoring this solution? Do you support it? It's something that you say we need this, or something like we prefer to stick to what we have and it works without renewables balancing? What is your approach regarding this topic?
Yeah. So our view is that from our point of view, all the energies are the same. So basically, we see balancing services as a service that can be provided with a certain rules, and that can be provided by different type of generation or of demand. And in this way, we are open to having new actors also coming to this type of services. Until now, actually, the limits have been regulatory. But it seems that with the new regulation approved, like our EEG, the new EEG for Spain was published in 2014, and in this regulation, actually, it opened the door for renewable energies such as wind and solar to participate in balancing service, and we are open to that as long as they fulfill the technical needs of these services. In any case, right now we are in the process. So we sent a draft also to the ministry of the tests in order to be done to the plants in order to fulfill these services and these tests. And if you read them, you can see that they are open also. Wind could be actually also be providing balancing service or solar PV. So actually our view is that we want to try to, or we want that these markets actually increase their liquidity with also RES.
Gut, vielen Dank. Meine Damen und Herren, vielen Dank.
Thank you.
Das war wirklich interessant.
Danke.